Hello and welcome to the Deb Calvert People First Productivity Solutions channel here on Bright Talk. I am really excited today to be presenting to you about a really big, meaty topic. I have to tell you though, we're only going to scratch the surface. This topic is too big for any 45 minutes. I'm going to introduce you though to several different ways of thinking about your sales culture so that you have a starting point. And I'm going to encourage you to be in touch with me if you're ready to go a little more in depth or want some ideas about the next steps. I'm going to keep it high level so that you won't miss out on the essentials, the most important building blocks, no matter which direction you end up going. For those who are new to Bright Talk, let me point out just a couple of things. The first one is that if you are having any technical difficulties during this presentation, the best place to go is straight to that button, an orange button that says Get Live Support Now. That's the Bright Talk tech team, and they're really responsive. They'll do a better job for you than I possibly could. I also want to point out that you have a drop-down menu that says Attachments and Links, and I do try to load up some attachments for you each time, give you some bonus content. One of the first things you'll notice there is that I gave you a PDF of today's slides. So if you want to download the presentation and take notes along the way or reference it later on, please do that. Feel free. Okay, so like I said, I'm Deb Calvert. I know that I've met a lot of you before. I scanned the list before I came into the presentation and saw a lot of familiar names, but some new ones too. So let me just say that I've been working in sales my entire career. I worked at a Fortune 500 company overseeing sales. I've also worked at the corporate level in HR and operations, so I have a pretty mixed background. And then over the past 14 years, since I founded People First Productivity Solutions, I've worked with hundreds of companies, many of them right where you are, thinking ways to shape or reshape their sales culture. So I'm coming with a lot of experience and a lot of observations from many different industries and companies. Hey, something else, as long as you're looking at those attachments over there, I would like to be in touch with you beyond this presentation. So I gave you a link to my LinkedIn profile, and I'd really appreciate it if you want to connect with me over there. I do put a lot of content out, and quite a bit of it goes through my LinkedIn feed, so you'll get something there of value, and I know I'll value our relationship and connection there too. Okay, enough about me, enough about Bright Talk. Let's start rolling. As I said, I'm going to keep this pretty high level. We're going to dive as deep as we are able to in 45 minutes. I will take some detours in what I've planned. If you post some questions for me, I'm happy to take your questions, and I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. And certainly if any are left over, I'll tackle those at the end also. Okay, so if we're going to talk about sales culture, the very first thing we have to do is define workplace culture, because it's one of those words that gets bounced around a lot, and not everybody means the same thing when they use it. So what I've given you is kind of a simplified version of a definition that comes from Dr. Edgar Schein. Dr. Schein, he's one of the pioneers, one of the preeminent researchers in the field of workplace culture. And he breaks it down into three levels of culture: artifacts, beliefs, actually beliefs and values, I think is what he calls it, and then underlying assumptions. And he makes a really good point. When you examine a culture looking outside in, you'll notice that people can't really describe their workplace culture. They're too close to it. It's sort of like asking a fish to describe water. The fish isn't even aware of his environment because he's immersed in it. He's swimming in it. He's completely oblivious to its presence or its importance. And we're the very same way about workplace culture. We're swimming in it, and we're oblivious to its presence, and we really do have a tough time describing it, even when we're asked a direct question about it. People always ask me, what are your favorite definitions of workplace culture? And this one is a starting point, breaking it down into three pieces so that when you're trying to decide what the culture is, you are looking at those three pieces: artifacts, beliefs and values, and underlying assumptions that people make. But I'll give you another one. Here's a formal definition. I like this one. It comes from Dr. Dan Dennison. He's also a pretty well-known authority in workplace culture. He's out of the University of Michigan. And he says this. He says that workplace culture is the underlying values, beliefs, and principles that serve as a foundation for an organization's management system, as well as the practices and behaviors both exemplify and reinforce those basic principles. So in a nutshell, workplace culture is what is establishing the norms of behavior and expressing the shared values of an organization. Essentially, it is, like Dr. Shine says, it's how we get stuff done around here. So it does beg the question, if that's all it is, if that's what it is, then why does it matter what kind of workplace culture you develop? And the short answer is that it matters because those highest performing cultures and subcultures like subsidiaries or divisions, departments, teams, the ones who are the strongest consistently have three compelling attributes. Right? You could probably come up with these yourself. They consistently produce outstanding results, they attract, motivate, and retain top talent, and they successfully adapt to changing conditions. And those three compelling attributes, results, talent, and change, they are fueled by a strong, healthy, consistent culture. A sales culture that has an impact. It's not accidental, it's not organic, it's deliberate, and therefore it's able to be sustained. All right, so there's a great big definition of sales culture. That's what you're after. I think the next question we have to think about is, well, okay, where does this sales culture come from? If it's not organic, if it's not some sort of accidental thing that you happen to luck into, where does it come from? It is intentionally set, then it becomes a byproduct of whoever's on your sales team. And that's an unstable culture. It's one that causes a lot of unnecessary friction and one that's unpredictable and unsettling to the people who are in it. So you do want one, you want it to be deliberate, and you, the manager who's most closely involved in any workplace, in any environment, you are the one ultimately who sets the sales culture. And the way you do that, it's not so much of an esoteric exercise. You might start there thinking about some of the questions I'll pose to you today. But ultimately, just like we heard in those definitions, it's about behaviors that you choose. It's about what you reinforce in your practices. Your management system has certain practices. They have beliefs and principles that are driving them. And what you're doing with your beliefs and principles, your practices and your behaviors, the way you recognize people, reward people, hire, promote, performance manage, conduct meetings, those practices are what ultimately shape your culture. So we're going to be talking about you. We're going to be talking about you, the manager, or you, the person who has an impact on the manager in the sales division. And we're going to talk about the things that you can do to set the sales culture that you're looking for. Now, there are challenges to doing that, of course. If there weren't, you wouldn't be attending this presentation. You wouldn't have to think about sales culture at all. It would just be easily there for you. But there are challenges, and most of those challenges come from all the things sales managers, unfortunately, end up neglecting. And I say that with the greatest of admiration for sales managers. I think that there is no harder job in the world to do, because sales managers are pulled in many directions every day. They have more constituent groups than just about any other position does. And it's hard for sales managers to get out of the fray and have an opportunity to strategically, planfully shape anything, let alone an entire culture. So I do know that what I'm describing and suggesting here is rather challenging. By the way, when it comes to why sales management is so difficult and what people surrounding sales managers ought to do about it, there are a couple of other webinars already on this channel back in the archives. I encourage you to go back and look for all of the ones related to sales management and why it's so difficult, because you'll get some talking points you can take to your boss. But once you have an opportunity, once you have the way forward to begin shaping your culture, everything else will click into place and become much easier. You won't have to be as reactive, and you won't have to be as involved in the day-to-day if you truly have a high-functioning culture. Those challenges, the ones that you'll have to overcome to get started on this path, are on screen, and the nature of them is all strategic. It's about getting things aligned. Instead of being reactive, you proactively pull together and connect the dots between business goals and people practices. You have a purpose, everything you do, in the ways that it serves your business goals. I'm not talking about just revenue goals, although that's a factor, but the higher level goals of the business, the strategic goals of the business are going to have some implications here. You'll also want to make sure that all of your sales productivity drivers are aligned and that they support business goals. There's a webinar here that's all about the productivity drivers. If you don't know what those are, if you haven't caught that presentation before, be sure and check that one out. You're going to want to have things in sequence too. So what do you focus on first? What's the most important thing? How do you go about reaching the most important thing? Do your messages match what you're saying about the most important thing? Here's a classic example. Some sales managers focus in every meeting and all day long on driving revenue, top-line revenue. And sometimes the business is really focused beyond sales on bottom-line profit. So here are your sales managers making and authorizing all kinds of cuts to make deals and drive top-line revenue, and actually that's having an adverse effect on the bottom line. So when I say alignment and sequence of focus, I'm talking about beyond the obvious, because I know your first thought was, well, obviously the focus is revenue, but sometimes there are some other factors to consider there. Okay, other challenges: how to communicate what you expect. What is it that, what skills are needed to meet those expectations? And that includes you. What skills do you need so that you are able to support this culture you're creating? And how good of a change manager are you? Because if you're thinking about reshaping a culture, there's bound to be some changes that are involved there. So these are all challenges. None of them are insurmountable. All of them require elevating so that you're not out there doing frontline field sales work, so that you're not bogged down in paperwork and reporting and forecasting, but that you are carving out some time to set the culture. When you do that, it's an investment of time that will save you a lot later on. You'll have things operating in a way that is much smoother and much more productive. Okay, so let's flash forward here. You're going to call me if you need help in working through these challenges, but we're going to keep going because this is this high-level overview of all the things you might need to know about sales culture. Now, how do you know that sales culture change is needed? Or how do you convince the boss and the boss's boss that you need time, effort, to put toward creating a sales culture? Here are some of the symptoms that a culture change is needed. These aren't the only ones, but these are some of the most obvious ones. What's your turnover like in the sales department? What are the gaps? The gaps would be measured in things like, are your sales cycles longer than they really should be? Are you ending up with a lot of small deal sizes as opposed to getting the bigger deals that would make everyone's job easier? Is there inadequate prospecting to keep the pipeline filled? Right? These are the kinds of gaps in performance that I'm just thinking about here. You also need a change in culture if there's a lot of turmoil internally. The sales department is at odds with the fulfillment department, and customer service and credit are at odds with sales. And the sales team is fighting each other over territorial turf stuff. If you have any of that going on, it could signal that you need a culture change. These other ones, these are a little bit more about a sales manager's ego. So be careful here. If you see that the sellers aren't all that interested in your sales meetings, or if there seems to be low morale, don't jump to the conclusion that you have underperforming sales reps who need to be moved out of the organization. Maybe that's true, but before you go there, I'd encourage you to think about your culture and how it impacts people, and what could be different in the performance of those people and in the way they show up if the culture were different. The SM mentality that may be healthy if it's externally directed, but if it's internal, one sales team versus another, for example, maybe a culture change is needed. And then finally, if people just aren't getting motivated by, aren't responsive to the KPIs and the sales activities they need to be looking at, well, that too is a signal. Something's wrong, and you're not going to really get the results you're looking for if you can't get the activities that are needed. Okay, so these symptoms, these are the warning signs. You probably already see some of these or know about these, otherwise you might not be here for this particular presentation. So now it's time. You've identified the warning signs. You've carved out some time to work on sales culture. Here's what's going to happen next. You're going to first figure out what your ideal is. What do you want to see people doing? What values and beliefs do you want to see showing up in their actions and choices? What consistent practices would you like to see in place so that when you ask people, how do we get things done around here, they report what needs to be done, that the behaviors, the activities that you want to see that you know drive results. You're going to envision all of that. You're going to capture it, write it down. This is the most esoteric part of the exercise. You're going to envision what it's supposed to be so that you can activate against it and turn that abstract into something concrete. Okay, then you're going to make sure that you are doing two things. You're demonstrating those norms and values. You're not saying one thing but doing another. And you are sufficiently resourcing people so that they could be doing those things too. You wouldn't say, in our new sales culture, everybody's going to make 50 new sales calls a day. You wouldn't say that if you weren't allowing ample time and providing quality leads to make that happen. So you're going to get alignment, and you're going to make sure that there's value that people can share in this vision that you're creating. You're going to express it in a way that speaks about the possibilities for the sales team, for the people who have to live in that culture. You're going to make sure that they understand the connections between what you are envisioning and why that would be an improved state compared to what it is now. And then you'll use some good change management skills to roll this out, to enlist some champions, to continually show those benefits, and to get people on board with you. That's deliberate culture shaping. Okay, now, as you do all of that shaping, you're also going to want to give something contextual to your team, right? That as you're communicating, it just can't be abstract. It's got to be in context with other things going on in your organization. Let's say that your organization is one that strongly believes in doing things that make sense for the planet. Right? You're very environmentally aware, and one of your core values is good environmental stewardship. Maybe some of the people on your team were attracted to that. They feel good working for a company that has those kinds of values. Now, whatever you're putting out there for a sales culture would leverage what comes down, what cascades from the overarching goals and values and vision of the organization. You can't be the outlier. You can't ignore the things that are already part of the culture. You've got to weave it all together so that it makes sense for people. Part of your communication will make those connections and tie those threads together. That's where it gets solid and it feels good and it makes sense to people. Okay, don't forget, you can post questions for me at any time. I do know I'm going at lightning speed here because there's so much to cover, but I want your questions to direct where we go. Okay, now we're getting practical. These are the questions that will help you decide how you're going to create your culture, the one that you're envisioning. I already told you about the first one. You're thinking about how you want things to get done. Not just what you want, right? That part is obvious. You want X% of goal versus last year. You want X number of percentage of new business, whatever it is. You've got those. This is about how. How do we get there? The steps people take, the attitudes they show, the types of customers they pursue, all of those are the how. And those hows need to be every bit as clear to people as the what's. Otherwise, they're going to make it up, and you'll have as many different hows as you do salespeople on your team. Okay, secondly, once you know how you want that work to be done, you want people to think about their own beliefs. You want to shape their beliefs. Their beliefs are going to cause them to either, yes, do the things the way you want them done, or no, do things some other way, or maybe even do other things entirely. So if you're asking them to do something that doesn't make sense to them, their own beliefs that this doesn't make sense will cause them to do something different. So think about the beliefs you want them to have, because you'll ultimately need to be sharing and shaping those beliefs, showing the successes, helping people to form new beliefs. And along with that, as touchy-feely as it might sound, you also want to take into account the mood, the atmosphere, the vibe. How do you want people to feel when they're at work? How do you want them to interact with each other? What values do you want them to exhibit, both internally as well as externally with your customers? All of these are going to get embedded in this culture that you shape. So we've got to figure it out on the front end. Now here it is. We're all the way to number 4. Yes, performance expectations also matter. Performance expectations need to be served by and aligned with the first 3 items. That's why we don't start there, because you always start there. And now we've got some other things to factor into. Okay, here are some other considerations. Now that you've done all that thinking and esoteric kind of work, we're moving into the practical. You'll need to do some observation. Take a look at the most successful salespeople in your organization. What are they doing? What attitudes do they display? What are their daily practices? What is it that makes them more successful than others? Be sure and consider that. Don't assume it's just that they are a natural-born salesperson or that they have more experience. You want to get this to a point where it is observable and can be replicated. That's what you want to bring into your culture. And then look for your barriers. Okay, you know your desired culture. You know the beliefs you want people to espouse. You know the kinds of things that are working for the most successful folks. Well, what is it that might be in the way? What are some potential discrepancies, some barriers, some mixed messages? Be candid with yourself. Look hard at all of this, because that's what you'll need to eradicate or at least consider before you put your message out there. Last but not least, take a look at why people are responding the way they do. Currently, everybody has an idea about how we do things around here. Where did that idea come from? Did they transport it in with them from their last place of business? And so you've got a lot of different ways we do things around here? Or is there a really strong voice, positive or negative, a really strong voice on your team who influences people more than you do? Or is there some other factor that's driving the way things are getting done? If it's not a positive, you might want to think about reshaping some beliefs so that you have people doing things in another way, something that overrides the way they're doing things now. Okay, we're going to take these one by one, starting with the how. I want to go deeper into each of these. You know, I said that the how matters just as much as the what. What you expect, well, that's obvious to everybody. You expect revenue. You expect a certain set of activities to drive that revenue. But equally important is the way people achieve those results. That's equally important because when people do things the wrong way, ultimately it can be very damaging. It can hurt an organization, for example, if salespeople are getting the right results, but they're getting them because they misrepresent your product or overpromise something that can't be delivered. So you need people to do two things, and I've illustrated that for you in this little box model. You need to get the right results the right way. That's up here in the upper right-hand corner box. RR stands for right results. RW stands for right way. The people who are getting the right results and doing things the right way, that is what you want more of in your culture. That's what you want people to replicate. That's what you want to be able to capture in a set of observable behaviors. And by the way, reward that too, because you rewarding the right way will cause other people to adopt the right way as well. The one I just talked about a moment ago to the left here, this is getting the right results. I'm sorry, it's below. It's getting the right results but doing things the wrong way. That's in the lower right-hand corner. Yay for the results. And I know it's hard to challenge a salesperson when they're driving revenue. You want them to keep doing that. But think longer term. Think more strategically. If they're getting those results the wrong way, maybe it's not even intentional or nefarious. Maybe they're writing a gravy train account and they're getting all of the revenue from one gravy train as opposed to continually building new business. But next year, they are still set up for success. Whatever the wrong way is, you shouldn't look the other way. Coach, help your salespeople, even those who are getting the right results, help them to do things the right way, because the right way is what matters most to a successful, sustainable sales culture. Let's talk about the other two boxes just briefly. Here we've got people getting the wrong results on the left-hand side. Sometimes you have people getting the wrong results, but they're doing things the right way. Those people usually ultimately succeed. They keep slugging at it, and the right way, if it truly is the right way, that's going to make people successful. You may have to coach them, you may have to help them, but don't discourage them from doing things the right way. You may look and see if the right way isn't working for some reason. Maybe it's no longer the right way, but by and large, the right way doesn't change all that often. And then last but not least, lower left box, this is the salesperson who's getting the wrong results and doing things the wrong way. That can be really, really detrimental to your culture. If you allow for that, you're sending a signal to everyone else that actually results don't matter that much. And you can do things any way you want to around here. We're going to turn a blind eye to it. And when people see that, they no longer respect what you're asking them to do. Frankly, they no longer respect you. And this is something that you're going to want to address. You've got to weed out the parts of your business that are not serving the culture you want to develop. Okay, secondly, we said that, oh, wait, before we get to secondly, I forgot I included this for you. This is a big old eye chart. I gave you the slides. You'll be able to look at that, magnify it when you look at it on screen. This is you being deliberate in how your team sells. So I've given you two options just to show you contrast. There could be many, many more. But the way to use this chart is to look at what's in the first column versus the second column. Every row has a different comparison. You might be really encouraging your sales team to visit established customers, or you might be really encouraging and supporting and managing for your team to call on new prospects. Whichever one of these you emphasize the most, whichever one you allow for, if your sales team is choosing one, that becomes how we do things around here. So if you need new business development, but really your practices and your allowances are for hanging out with established customers, shooting the breeze, going so deep into the relationship that there's no more time left for calling on new prospects, then your culture will be something other than what you intend. Let me take another one. I'm moving down toward the bottom. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. Be a salesperson on the left versus be a consultant on the right. That's a tricky one. It's one you have to really consider. What do you want your salespeople to be? Which type of salesperson are you hiring? What behaviors are you encouraging, recognizing, and rewarding? And what are you teaching people to do? There's a difference. You have to make decisions like all the ones on screen plus others so that you're deliberate in how you go about doing business. Every single item on this list and many other items that you'll come up with should be on purpose, not haphazard or accidental. Okay, number two, I said people need to think about the beliefs that are out there in the members of their teams. And this is meant to show you a little bit more about why that is. You're looking at something that's all about culture. This comes from a book called Journey to the Emerald City. And it works like this. You see, here's what's happening on top of the pyramid. You're probably, if you're like most sales managers, you're probably spending a lot of time looking at the top two parts of this pyramid. You're focused on results. You're driving for certain actions because you know those actions will lead to the right results. However, if you're focusing in those two areas, you're managing, but you're not going deep enough. You need to get below that midline so that you are also leading. You got to lead people at the same time that you manage sales. And the only way to do that is to get into the beliefs that people have and give them the right experiences that shape the right beliefs. And the reason for that is simply this. I'm working up from the bottom of the pyramid now to explain it. Whatever experiences I have, they cause me to have certain beliefs of my own. And my beliefs, not yours, what I've experienced that caused me to have certain beliefs, that's what's ultimately going to cause me to choose whichever actions I choose. As long as you're micromanaging, standing over my shoulder, doing a ride along with me, I might do the actions that you asked me to. But as soon as you're not looking, my own experiences and my own beliefs are going to cause me to choose the actions that may or may not really drive the results you're looking for. So instead of telling people the actions you want, you need to go a little deeper, dive into the experiences that I've had in the past, give them new ones, and give them a chance to have the beliefs that you know will truly make them successful. All of that is about the culture that you create. Here's a little piece of research for you to show you why this matters. When people have clarity about their organization's values and clarity about their personal values, their own beliefs, when they have clarity of both, they are more, this is a 7-point scale, upper right-hand corner is where you're looking, they are more likely to be successful and happy and engaged. These are people who are going to stick with the organization longer. So you want them to have beliefs of their own that also match what you're asking them to do and align with your organization's values. They might not have brought those beliefs in with them. You may have to help shape those beliefs through the experiences that you give them. Now, make no mistake, I'm not talking about manipulating people. I'm not talking about false kinds of experiences or anything that's construed. I'm talking about real experiences. So if they try something that you've asked them to do and they have success with it, that you celebrate that success, that you point out for them how what you asked them to do is what led to the success, how they could do it again if they tried, how it's an admirable thing if they took a risk and went out on that limb to do something new. You affirm what they chose. You give them a positive experience. You make it easy for them, desirable for them to do it over and over again until they form a new habit, and with it, a new belief that consistently causes them to now choose that action that will give you the results you're looking for. All right, lightning speed here. I told you we were going to cover a lot of ground. We said that the other thing that has to happen is that your performance expectations need to be considered. You're shaping a culture. Obviously, it's a sales culture. Sales is a part of this culture, and sales has a lot of performance expectations that are critically important. So now what does this mean for the culture? It means that you've got to think about a whole lot of things, not just these things. This is 1 out of 7. But whatever it is that you truly expect, if we're thinking about how we get things done around here, you can't put it out there and then not resource it, not inspect it, not coach for it. You've got to have sufficient attention around it, or people will not believe. It won't be credible that that's how you really do things around here. It'll just look like you're micromanaging and putting a bunch of arbitrary requirements out there. And you know, salespeople, they're skeptical. They think if you ask them to do 10 things, that really it's just because you want something to pick on them about, or because you want an excuse not to give them a raise, or something else. They make stuff up. So if something really does matter to you, if it matters enough to put it into a performance expectation, consider it in your culture, in your day-to-day activities, in what you say, in what you role model, in what you focus on in meetings, in what you put resources behind. Make sure you get all of those people practices aligned with your expectations. I put some on screen here for you to consider. Again, this is just some of them, but it's a good place to start. Your performance expectations, it's not just what you expect. Here again, we have a component of how. This how is about you. So the impact that you're going to have on your culture that's pretty closely linked to performance expectations is about how much control you, as the sales manager, wants to have. And these are all legitimate choices. Different types of businesses, different industries have different norms. And if you've got brand new salespeople versus veteran salespeople, different choices are going to be appropriate in those different situations too. But these are choices. Don't do this haphazardly. Don't do this because it's what comes naturally. Don't make a choice like this just because it's what you've seen demonstrated by someone else. Instead, think about the culture you want to create. Think about the needs of your team. And then decide, do you want to be someone who's a high degree of control manager or a low degree of control? And do you want to be focused on having a lot of input, or do you want to be focused on more of the output? See, those two choices here, again, as a box model, they have pros and cons, but they're going to help you make some deliberate decisions. You don't want to put out there one message, but then have a set of behaviors that look different. You wouldn't want to say, I count on my salespeople to be really independent, to be autonomous, to make up their own minds about how they go about getting success. All I care about is the result. You don't want to say something like that if you're coming along behind them and exerting a high degree of control, getting really involved in customer relationships, checking daily on sales calls reports, doing other things that are highly involved in the seller's work. So that's a consideration for you too. And this time is just flying by. Remember, you can call me. It's an open invitation. Call me if you have questions about this. You'll also want to think about how you define success. Remember, we're covering 7 different questions here. One of them is what does success look like? This is an important one because it's not just about the number. It's not just about the result. It's also about how people get that result, right results, right way. One of the things that I end up having to really coach a lot of sales managers about is that what they celebrate, what they recognize, what they give rewards for is sales performance alone. And when you give results only affirmation, you're actually signaling to people that the only thing that matters is the number. So if all that matters is the number, and if I am not someone who has a territory where I can never be number one, I'm going to be demotivated. And if I'm someone who sees the top performer doing something that isn't quite right for whatever reason, I'm going to be more likely to do things that aren't quite right also. So really consider what success looks like and be sure that you're putting some energy into recognizing the right way, the way we do things, the number of new business development calls you make, the interactions and reviews that you have from your customers, the number of errors that you make according to credit, whatever it might be, whatever is important to you, the right way needs to be expressed out to the team. Okay, and you'll have to watch for mixed messages. Everyone does this. It's accidental. But you need to be clear. You need to be clear in stating what matters most. And whatever it is that matters most should have some stickiness. It shouldn't be something new every day or every week because it's serving this higher purpose. So align this with your organization. That's good organizational health. If you want to know more about this, the book to read is called The Advantage. It's by Hal Lencioni. But get up there at the high level. That's where people are inspired. And then make sure that all of your messages are cascading out of that higher level purpose. Make sure that you're not sounding like you are in misalignment with your organization. And say whatever's important. Say it over and over again. Make it as simple as possible. And use as many different ways to communicate it as you possibly can. Reinforce it in your people practices. Are you hiring people that exhibit the core values of your company? When you manage performance, is it about the how people do things in alignment with your company's values? Here again, as you reward and recognize people. And when you dismiss people, is it only for not delivering the number? Or does it also take into account how we do things around here, our expectations? Now, you've heard me say a couple times that you will want to work at the level of experiences and beliefs. So I've given you another piece here to help you do that. To change the experience that people have, you've got to think about what you're asking them to do. I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong here. That's for you to decide. But you might have to do some real thought work. I've tried to give you some accelerator tools to do that. What you see on the left in this chart are all the short-term kinds of things that I would say about 90% of sales managers do focus on. Even though the company, the strategic planning meetings, the executive reports and summaries that go to the board, the higher level stuff almost always focuses on the long term. And that can be confusing to a sales team. And it can actually put you in a precarious position when it comes time to apply for a next level job or to get budget or to explain why your team is underperforming. Because if you've only ever been in the short term and aren't delivering on the long term, it can be a career limiter for you. So don't let that happen. Make sure your cultural decisions and your actual actions line up so that, yes, you're delivering for the short term, but you're also creating possibilities for the long term. That brings us back to that whole notion of managing sales at the very same time that you're leading people. Okay, so consider yourself exposed to a whole lot of bits and pieces about sales culture. When I work with organizations, it takes a few months to work through the pieces we've just talked about and all the other pieces that are layered in there. I just wanted to give you a snippet. I've given you some attachments there that I probably haven't mentioned. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's a blog post you could read that goes a little more in depth and an infographic that can serve as a reminder to you. And you've got some information about the Sales Experts channel, which is where you'll find me next year for all the sales content that I deliver. In the meantime, I really do encourage you to be in touch with me. I think I've answered all the questions asked so far, and we've run out of time. So be in touch with me if you have any questions at all that I can help you with. Hey, thanks for being here today.